Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, dealing with loss is more complex than I think any of us ever really know until we're in the middle of it. And if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more, as always. My name is Dave Voigt, and I'm the host of this podcast where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain on not only current projects, but state of the industry influences, how they got started, and all sorts of fun stuff. And if you'd like to subscribe to the podcast, and, you're listening, so, we certainly hope that you would, you can find us wherever you find your podcast, basically. You can, over at Amazon, over at Google, Apple, Spotify, and plus, you can go over to our YouTube channel and find every single one of our episodes archived there as well. Also, it'd be great if you'd follow us on social media. You can do that at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at either In The Seats or at It's Podcast One for all sorts of updates. And finally, and probably most importantly, please give us a visit over at intheseats.ca for all the latest and greatest movie news, reviews, and anything else we can think of under the sun from the world of cinema, television, and beyond. On this episode, well, that's a good one. It's an interesting one. We're talking with writer-director Miranda Nation about her film Undertow, which is on VOD platforms now, and it's about a couple and the loss of a child and sort of the struggles that are around that. But the wife is noticing that her husband has an awkward relationship with a young woman who she doesn't know, and things start to develop from there. And it's a bit of a mystery. It's a bit of a thriller. It's a quality little film from our friends Down Under, as it were. A nice little example of the quality of Australian filmmaking. And we sat with writer-director Miranda Nation to talk about the inspiration for the film, how she got started putting stuff like this together, and just sort of state of the business and sort of filmmaking from another country, which is always an interesting thing. And like I said, it's a good little film, which I do recommend you check out if you're looking for something on sort of VOD land that might be a little different from the norm. But I hope you enjoy our talk with Miranda, because it was a good one. But obviously, congratulations on the film. I was really quite struck by it. And I'm just kind of
Thank you.
curious, what was sort of the inspiration for the story? Because we've had other films with similar themes, but this felt like it definitely was taking more of a purposely darker turn with the subject matter.
Okay. Look, I think the biggest sort of inspiration and theme for me, and something that recurs a lot in my work, is the theme of the human body and our relationships with our bodies, and the kind of the tension between the primal and the instinct and reason, and our animal selves versus our intellectual selves. So that's something that keeps coming up in my work that I'm obviously quite obsessed with. And so each of the characters in it are kind of dealing with their body in different ways. And for Claire, the main character, it's something that I've seen in a lot of women and couples in that I know, where you're sort of kind of cruising along, and then once you start that journey towards wanting to be a parent, suddenly a lot of people come up against the fact that it's actually not that simple, and that this body that you think is just serving you actually has a kind of a mind of its own. And it can be a really heartbreaking and anguished journey for a lot of people, trying to come to terms with the fact that they either can't have a child or that they have multiple losses. So that was and the grief that surrounds that, and the coming to terms or never coming to terms with that is something that really interested me, and that I saw everywhere around me, but not really being talked about that much. So that was probably the kind of the center of the idea, and it all stems out from there.
Because it's one of those things when you see it unfold. It was the dynamic between Claire and Angie that was really standing out for me, because it was one of those things where you could see how Claire was projecting, but at the same time Angie was almost doing the same thing. And I'm kind of curious, like when you're casting something like this, especially given with this source material, like how important is it just in terms of finding the right people who mesh? Because if they're not doing the right dance together, the film doesn't work.
Yeah, entirely. I mean, it was so important to get that chemistry right between those two women. I mean, that relationship, as you've said, is the heart of the story, and the way that that obsession that develops predominantly, I guess you could see it as Claire obsessed with Angie, but it's also vice versa. You know, Angie sees in Claire this kind of older woman who has status and power, something that Angie aspires to. So the obsession is in some ways mutual and, you know, multi-layered, and that complex relationship between two women was something that I really wanted to explore, not necessarily, you know, a sexual relationship or a romantic relationship, although I think there are elements of both of those in there, but just the sort of the deep and multi-layered relationship that two women can have. And, you know, on one end of the spectrum, there's Claire, who desperately wants to have a child and is fighting her body and sees her body as this kind of barren wasteland. And then Angie, who doesn't want a child, and yet Claire sees her as this kind of rampantly fertile, youthful body that can have a child that Claire so desperately wants. So there's that, again, the theme of the body comes into it there.
Well, and I mean, and the dynamic between them two really does sort of speak to sort of, in many ways, the nature of grief. Because I mean, I was looking at Claire and just sort of almost, I like really feeling for her when she's trying to, when people are trying to sort of shoehorn into her into these sort of stages of grief and sort of ceremonies and things that she should perform that all kind of felt like bullshit, and she wanted to sort of push back on that. The film really does speak to sort of how grief, as people think it's quantifiable, it really actually isn't quantifiable in so many ways.
Yeah. And that's what people say, isn't it? That, like, you know, particularly in our culture, I mean, I think other cultures have different and often healthier ways of dealing with grief, but, you know, it's something that a lot of people don't know how to deal with, and not, you know, necessarily their own grief, but other people's grief. And so, you know, people say that for maybe the first 3 months after the loss of a loved one, everyone's really kind and caring and empathetic and supportive. And then it's like, oh, okay, well, that's the time done now, and now you should be over it, or at least people kind of move on. Of course they do. But for someone who's lost a loved one or a pregnancy or a child, that grief, they live with it forever. And I think that's something that we're not very good at knowing how to deal with in someone else. And going back to your earlier point about the casting, I mean, that was just crucial, that that the actresses playing Claire and Angie had that chemistry, and they did. Laura and Olivia were both fearless and courageous and, you know, extremely committed in their own rights, but they also really bounced off each other and had a great time playing off each other. And, you know, that created some magic, I think.
Do you get a lot of time with Olivia and Laura and something like this, or did you have to sort of jump in with both feet and sort of find it all on set?
We were pretty lucky, actually. It was really important to us, to myself and the producer, that we had that lead-in time. You know, I think in film, often you have a little bit more luxury in rehearsals than in TV, but still it can be really tight, and, you know, different people's schedules often play into that. Laura and I definitely had a great preparation. We started meeting up quite a long time before the shoot and just talking through everything and exploring, and then we had, you know, a good solid rehearsal period. Like, I'm talking about, you know, over a week. We had a few days, but that was good. And then with Olivia just came in because she was sort of straight off another project, but she came in that week, and we did some good kind of improvising around their relationship. And, well, actually it was important with, for example, with Claire and Dan, that we needed to do all that stuff of relationship building, because this is a marriage, this is a couple that have been together for a long time. But with Claire and Angie, they were meeting for the first time, so we did want to keep that spontaneity of them not really knowing much about each other. So we kind of tried to do rehearsals that got them familiar with the script, but without delving too deep into the relationship.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I also really loved sort of the visual design of the film as well, because I really felt like we could get into Claire's sort of increasingly growing paranoia over sort of everything that's been going on around her. And I mean, and particularly sort of the scenes in the house between her and Rob, and just sort of the use of darkness and shadow and how everything sort of felt very sort of surreptitious and nebulous. Like, you talk a little bit about that,
Great.
because I love just sort of the stylistic choices to sort of get us into the mood on this one.
Oh, great. Well, yeah, my collaborator Bonnie, we've worked together on a few projects, and she's a genius. She's I can't speak highly enough of her. She's one of Australia's sort of, most talented cinematographers, and she's got a beautiful eye, but she's also got a really great head for story. So once again, we had a great preparation. Because we'd shot a short together many years before, and she'd been on board with this project for a number of years, reading drafts, and we were doing recce's and doing mood boards and everything. So, everything was a really conscious choice. And I think her cinematography is just stunning, and it really not only serves the story, but actually kind of makes the film.
What?
The idea of, sorry,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that idea, like you said, of being really close to Claire and being in her sort of subjective world, and at times not knowing what's really happening and what is a projection of her grief and her growing obsession and paranoia.
Has this been the passion project for you, like sort of the culmination of everything to come to your first feature? This is your first feature,
Yes,
right?
It is my first feature. Yeah. It was a labor of love over many years, and I think having a little distance from it now, because it is a while since we made it, I can see that, there was an intensity to the process that I've learned from, and of course you want that passion, but also in some ways it's probably an issue of a lot of first features or first novels or whatever, where you kind of throw everything at it, and anyway, it's interesting having a step back from it, and
well, I'm sure, because in the moment you're going to be so wholly invested, and you're not going to see the forest for the trees, but now you kind of can see the forest for the trees. I can imagine it's an interesting time.
And yeah, don't they say that a film's never completed? I mean, never finished. It's just abandoned or something. I don't know.
Right? Yeah.
And I didn't abandon it, but it sort of abandoned me at some point, and I just had to, it's interesting, the process.
Now, was writing, sort of directing, storytelling, was that always sort of the drive for you? Because I go through your IMDb page, and you've done a little bit of everything.
I started as an actor, and actually I started studying medicine, so that's probably partly where my obsession with the body comes from. But I always wanted to be in the arts, and I thought, I guess, I wanted to be an actor. That's probably what I saw as a child. My kind of interface with that creative world of film that I always loved was the people I saw on screen. So that's what I aspired to be. And then I studied over in Paris, and I started experimenting, making, no budget kind of short films over there, and really got more into the behind the camera side of it. And then I started writing something for myself to act in. And then I realized, I don't really want to hand this over to someone else to direct. I actually really want to direct this myself. And then I realized I didn't really want to act in it that much. I actually was more interested in directing it, and in the writing and directing. And so I guess, as a child, when I first said I want to be an actor, I probably didn't even know what a director was, or realize that that was something that I could do or be. So it's sort of been a long, slightly winding journey to get to the point where I went, this is me. This is what I was always aspiring to, without necessarily being able to articulate it.
Now that you do have that separation, is there a preference?
Both writing and directing. I love them both, and I'd love to do both on some projects, and also then write for other people to direct, and direct other people's writing. But I don't really see myself as an actor anymore, and I don't. Someone asked me yesterday, did I miss acting? And I hadn't thought about it for a while, and I thought, no, I actually don't. I think I did for a little while, because it was a muscle that I was used to using, and now it's probably completely out of practice. It's not even active anymore.
Now, this is something I'm always curious about, because I mean, on one end, you're a writer, you're a director, you want to fulfill your creative vision and tell the stories you want to tell, but at the same time, because given the nature of the business these days, and given the nature of just the search for financing out there, which I'm sure is a beast all unto itself. Like, I'm
Yes.
kind of curious, how do you balance sort of the creative versus the commercial? Because I mean, I watch something like this and I see a little bit of both. I see, like you say, sort of the personal fascinations you've had with the body and just sort of our representation of that, but it's still a highly effective thriller at the same time.
Mm. Yeah, I think that that's one of the big learning experiences on this film. I probably started out, when I decided I wanted to write and direct, just thinking, I'll just make this wonderful film, the film that I want to make, and it will break through. I suppose gradually I learned, as you said, there's, it's a fairly ruthless industry, and there's a lot of factors that go into financing a film, and you've always got to be thinking about the audience. So it is a sort of a delicate balance, isn't it? Trying to balance that, intensely personal and creative aspect of any art form, but of filmmaking, with the brutal reality of the finance. So I think I'm getting better at navigating that, but yeah, it's still always there's still always that tension.
Now, going forward, do you see yourself sort of playing in these themes some more, or is there sort of is there like $100 million sci-fi script you've got in your desk somewhere that you're dying to get made? Like, what's the dream project?
Look, I've got a couple that are in development that are both dream projects for me. I'm developing another feature, which is very different, but again does play with that kind of that theme of relationship with the body and self-worth, and how it's all tied in with body image and that sort of thing. And then I'm also developing a TV series, which is a sci-fi, actually, a very grounded sci-fi. But again, it deals with body. It's got some themes of genetic engineering and artificial kind of intelligence, and the interface between the human body and artificial intelligence, that sort of thing. So yeah, that same themes in different guises.
Now, I mean, just to put a bow on this, and I'm always kind of curious because, I mean, obviously you're in Australia, you live there, you're making films for that market, but at the same time, given the nature of the business and sort of the media landscape, like, going into anything that, yeah, it could basically be seen anywhere. And I'm kind of curious,
Mm.
how does that global mindset sort of inform you when you're developing something?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't think you can really just make for the Australian market. I mean, particularly given the way that everything has changed in the way that we view content now. Everything is global now, isn't it? And
Yeah.
Australians traditionally haven't been particularly supportive of Australian film. I mean, it's actually we're in a very different climate at the moment because there has been so little production because of COVID. There's actually some Australian films at the moment that are just absolutely blitzing at the box office, and maybe they would have broken through like that anyway, but they don't have the kind of stiff competition of really big blockbusters at the moment. But yeah, in answer to your question, we're always looking outwardly, and we're always looking at an international marketplace. And so I think, ideally you want to make stuff that has something essentially Australian, because I think, we're a fascinating country with a lot of things to explore, but with themes that resonate on an international level.
No, and I love that you say that because, I mean, especially here in Canada, we've had sort of similar struggles just in terms with the stuff that we've made, but really
Mm,
been able to sort of try to push outside of that box a little bit in terms of making stuff that really does resonate on a global level, be it TV or be it
mm.
film. And I think this is a film that's going to resonate for the North American audiences, however they end up seeing it. And I
Oh,
really enjoyed
great.
it again. And thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you, Dave.
All
Thanks
right.
very much.
And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.